to this week's episode of Am I Going to Die? The ENT Institute. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Gallups. I forgot who I am. I'm the medical director at the ENT Institute, and I'm joined by Melissa
Moritz, that's who I am. Chief Accountability Officer at the ENT Institute. I also am responsible for all of the marketing efforts that we do, and that's how I wound up here. So we are talking about, am I going to die?
From a concussion, right? And that's very appropriate because this week in Atlanta is the Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl's in Atlanta.
And yeah, that's what I said. So anyway, so if you've been tuning in for a couple of weeks now, we're trying to get this down pat. The studio's not quite ready, but we're going to get there. Does it matter about what we're going to talk about? No, it doesn't. So we're just going to give you information. Am I going to die from a concussion? So, as always,
there are a lot of myths about this.
Lots of myths.
And it's a very important topic for anybody, but especially for people who have children, young children of all ages. So anyway, let's get started with some of the myths that we found out for concussions. I can only get a concussion if I hit my head.
That is not true. Whiplash, being in a car accident, playing sports, baseball players trying to catch a line drive running into the fence, anything that creates movement of the brain inside the skull. So let's talk about that. It's not just trauma, anything can cause concussion, which means you have damage to the brain, and the brain is in the calvarium, the skull, and it's surrounded with fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. And the brain is somewhat suspended, and the injury comes when the brain hits the skull. And it can be injured from the hit, and then when it rebounds, you get what they call a contre-coup, coup and contre-coup injury. So it's sometimes two injuries to the brain. And it doesn't have to be from a hit.
Falling down, that's a big one, like falling down.
Well, you can fall down. In fact, having a concussion may lead to you falling down. That's part of the diagnosis.
We just had a patient this week. We had Drizzle-mageddon come through Atlanta.
Right, no Snowmageddon like years ago.
And a patient called in because they were dizzy from ski accident, just falling down while skiing.
Right.
And
they could be dizzy. They could have had a concussion, or they may have just had an inner ear otolithic problem, the balance disorder related to the little bones in the inner ear not working properly. But who knows?
Before we dive into the more myths, real quick, is people might be saying, well, what does an ear, nose, and throat physician have anything to do with concussions? So I want to tackle that one real quick because why would a patient call us and say, I fell down skiing and I'm dizzy and I want to come in for an appointment?
Well, the reason someone would do that is because you naturally think as an ear, nose, and throat doctors treat dizziness, because dizziness is related to function in the middle ear. Yes, that's one cause, but also it could be related to visual issues or just what we call proprioception, how we feel in gravity. Right? Okay. But it's a natural course. A lot of people would also see a neurologist,
right,
or go to the emergency room or seek a physician. Then in referral, you would be sent to a neurologist more than likely, or an ENT problem if they feel that vertigo is the issue.
Got it. Okay.
But we have to clarify that vertigo and concussions aren't the same thing. Vertigo can be a symptom of concussion, and true vertigo is the sense that you're spinning on a stool and you stop. I don't know if I can spin on this thing, right? And I stop. That's vertigo.
Are you still spinning?
Not yet. I'd have to do it 2 or 3 times, But eventually, if I did this enough.
Is your brain shaking in there?
Well, it's not shaking. There's no concussion going on. But when I stop, now I'm kind of dizzy, right? And that's from the inner ear telling me that I've stopped motion.
God.
But concussions can leave you feeling as if you have vertigo or unsteadiness or foggy memory.
It's a terrible feeling. So you touched on visual. Myth or a fact that dilated pupils are a sign of a concussion?
Well, it can be true. I don't know if it's a complete myth, but it's not a good way to judge a concussion at all. Dilatation occurs from the fright-flight syndrome, sympathetic, you're excited, right? And you can have dilatation of the pupil, so it's larger. A better sign would be if it's asymmetrical, they're not the same size. But again, at the time you're trying to evaluate someone, unless you're a medical professional, it's hard to really
Right, a
determine
mom
that.
with a flashlight in my
Yeah.
child's eyes
Yeah.
trying to determine.
Yeah,
It's not the way to go.
that's right.
So, child, we think, or athlete has a concussion, or a post-accident victim has a concussion, and they go straight to the ER, and they think they need a CT scan or an MRI immediately. Fact or myth on that?
Well, CT scans are only going to show essentially blood. And right now, in this day and age, everybody wants the best medical care.
Right.
And they want that MRI or CT scan when actually less than 1% of people needed that. Now, at this point, when it's you and you're that 1%, that's 100%. Everybody wants to be sure that you don't have an intracranial bleed or a bleed inside the head. And because concussions, you can't really see, not a brand new fresh concussion, you can't see on an MRI or CT scan. You can only see blood, which you only see less than 1% of the time. But you don't know. So a lot of people tend to defer that way. Concussions are really diagnosed not based on MRI or CT scan, they're diagnosed based on symptoms.
Okay. So, we talked about children versus the older population. Would you say fact or myth on older people are more susceptible for or to concussions?
That's a myth. Children are actually more susceptible, or at least the data shows that they have more concussions. Why? They're less stable. Their heads, proportionally body mass, their head's more of their body mass than someone that's older. But the fact is, children are more concussed than older adults.
Very good. So, that one's a myth. So, oh, this is a huge one. You hear moms all the time saying, if I suspect my child of a concussion, I need to wake him up every 20 minutes. Myth or fact, you need to wake up your child every 20 minutes?
It's a myth. As long as they've been evaluated by someone who is a medical doctor who has the ability to diagnose and treat concussions, then waking them up every 2 to 3 hours, because really an injured brain needs rest. I mean, it would not be unusual to have somebody that they're tired. In fact, that's one of the signs of concussion, is not necessarily that you've lost consciousness at all, though you can see that. You can just have people that are just tired, their senses of how they hear, what they see are a little different. So it's been trauma to the brain.
That's a good one. That's a big one for me. I didn't know that until researching. So, how about taking pain medications or pain remedies for a concussion?
Let's say that you're in an automobile accident or something, or you playing football, you broke something, you were concussed. At the same time, you have an injury, you need pain medication. Generally, it's things that would tend to make you bleed are the things you don't want to take. So Tylenol is okay, but you don't want to take aspirin. You don't want to take anything that would make you bleed more. Pain medication, generally with Tylenol, is okay, but then pain medication blunts your sense as well, and it's hard to evaluate anyone like that. But that's a pretty severe injury.
Yeah. So here we go, myth or fact. I have a lot of friends who have children in sports, and they say, oh, a concussion isn't that serious.
Well, it is serious. Always should be taken seriously, should be evaluated by a healthcare professional. Whether you have to have a CT, MRI is another question. That's why you need to seek out somebody who's used to dealing with brain injury. But over time, if you repeat concussions, concussion after concussion, then it will lead to an encephalopathy.
Encephalopathy.
That means inflammation, abnormality associated with the brain, and that is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. CTE for short, right?
That's easier.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That's true. In fact, I think it's best heard from one of our physical therapists.
Let's do
at
that.
Our physical therapy center.
Okay.
So let's cut to that. Hey, I'm Dr. Jeff Gallups, Medical Director at the ENT Institute, and essentially over our physical therapy location, but really the real doctor here is Allison Robbins, who heads our physical therapy at the ENT Institute. And today we want to talk a little bit about concussion because it's so much a part of what we do here, dizziness, concussions, and also what is a concussion?
A concussion is essentially a brain injury, a mild traumatic brain injury that occurs from someone hitting their head, a velocity where someone is accelerating or decelerating. People don't actually even have to hit their head to get a concussion, but it's from something where there has been injury to the brain.
I didn't know that you didn't have to hit your head. Like, give me some instance where that would happen.
Okay, so for instance, like in playing a game of sports,
Right.
if someone were to be forced down quickly, but they actually didn't hit their head, and there was a shift in the brain, they would have an injury where that brain shifted and comes in contact with the skull.
How would you know if you've had a concussion?
Well, a person may have dizziness, or they have a fogginess, or they're not able to think clearly, they have headaches, light sensitivity. Those are all good signs to know that they may have had a concussion and something's going on.
And over what period of time would they have had those sensations? Like, I've fallen off a bike when I was a kid, and I definitely knew I had a concussion because I was a little blurry, but are there signs and symptoms early and some late?
Absolutely. Some people can have just some mild symptoms initially, but they can develop symptoms later on down the road. It may be even a year or two down the road that they're seeing symptoms, and it could be from that concussion.
Right. Mm-hmm. So what should you do if you think you've had a concussion?
It's most important to be evaluated, to go to a professional that knows how to assess the person, like our doctors here at the Ear, Nose, and Throat Institute and the physical therapy department, so we can do testing. We have specialized testing that we can do to find out, are they still symptomatic, and then we can treat them accordingly to get rid of it.
A term that's fairly new to you and me, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That's a great little term for what?
That means that a person has had repeated concussions that causes a degenerative disease of the brain. So a degeneration of the brain over time from having repeated concussions, oftentimes early in life.
Well, and besides boxers or football players, the only people who seem to be at risk for this?
Of course not. Anybody that's had a concussion or multiple concussions can. Often you'll see it in our veterans who have had repeated concussions in the line of duty.
And is there a cure for it?
No cure for it, unfortunately.
What should you do to prevent CT or chronic traumatic encephalopathy?
Well, the best
Don't
thing...
have a concussion.
Exactly. The best thing is to prevent the concussions. And obviously, concussions happen, but the biggest thing is to not go back to playing sports too soon or go back to doing their activities that could cause a repeated concussion too early on. So if you've had a concussion, you want to make sure that you're all the way healed before you go back to that activity, or you risk more damage over time.
Well, thanks for taking time with me today.
Yep.
I know we don't get much time even though we work together and all. But anyway, well, back to you in the studio. Hey, I'm Dr. Jeff. Oh, wow. Here we are, back
Two places
in.
at once.
How about that? Boom, boom. We filmed that. I love that.
Teletransportation.
Man, we got the best team in the world right here making this happen, making this look good and taller and that. So hopefully you found that informative. The ENT Institute, we can provide all the testing and therapy because you can rehabilitate from a concussion and things that you may not consider. You may be slightly off balance. You may not even notice it.
Can you shake it off?
Right?
Can you shake it off?
Yeah, no, you can't. Once you have the brain injury, then it takes time.
Oh, that would hurt if I had a brain injury and I shook it again.
Yeah,
You can't
that
shake
would.
it off.
Don't do that.
Don't do
because
that.
some things are noticeable right after a concussion and others may be delayed up to 2 weeks. And they're all neurologic. And that's where you need to be under the
about-
care of a
this
physical
happens-
therapist or doctor.
Sorry. I'm talking.
Go ahead.
Happens a lot. Car wreck, player falls down, player may get a concussion, and you have the inclination of moving them, like physically.
Well, if somebody is a football player, they hit, they roll over, they hop up, they're walking back, that's all well and good. But if someone has been concussed to the point that they're unconscious, then you really need to follow a standard protocol, and that is the ABCs, the airway, the breathing, and circulation. So you address those. Do not move somebody that is unconscious because, yes, they've had at least a concussion. We know because they're unconscious, but they may have other injuries, and you need to make sure they're breathing. So if you move them, you could create matter that's worse than what we're dealing with. They could have had a fracture of the neck, and if you have that and you move them, you could leave them quadriplegic too.
So please, it is a myth. Don't move the player or the person.
That's right too. That people who know what they're doing, they're trained, and a lot of people, lay people, are trained in this too. I mean, it is BCLS, basic life support. Okay?
Basic life support. I'm learning all these lingos today. So what about a coach or an athlete? You know, they're passionate about what they do and they want to get back in the game so they can decide when they're ready.
Well, they can't. You need a disinterested, if you will, third party, and it's such a big issue nowadays.
It really is.
Right, but because you see it in the NFL, again, we're talking about this topic because the Super Bowl is here in Atlanta this week. Concussions are a big issue in the NFL. They take them seriously, and we need to take them seriously in our young athletes, in any athlete. But you have to have a protocol, concussion protocol, and they vary. But you need a disinterested third party and or a physician or a healthcare provider to assess that. It shouldn't be someone who's actively participating in the sport.
That's the disinterested part, but we're all interested in getting that athlete better.
Yes.
So, okay, there's a lot of talk about this with all sorts of sports that wear helmets. There are now, with technology and everything we've got going for us, there are now technology-proof or concussion-proof helmets. Myth or fact?
Well, that's a myth, and I think everybody knows that. But you want to think the technology is improving, and it is for protection. In fact, they have the ability to know if you've had a hard enough hit, if you will, in a football helmet to be concussed. And you may or may not have been, or it may be a little less. But technology is coming a long way, but there's no guarantee at all that wearing a helmet will prevent a concussion. So you don't have to be hit in the head to have a concussion.
Don't have to be hit in the head to have a concussion. So helmets will not prevent a concussion. There is not that technology yet. But what about this one? And I think all parents are going to love this. Myth or fact? That children should avoid screens, screens at all costs after a concussion.
Well, that's a hard one. The first part of it is if you've been concussed, then you have visual issues, and it could be a good idea to not use these devices as much. But certainly after a period of time, if they're concussed and their activity level is lower, you don't want them estranged. So there's the psychological component of them being isolated and not doing what they see as a social norm for their age. So, there again, be good Dr. Mom, Dr. Dad. But initially, after a suspected concussion, we should go easy on the eyes, all the senses. Should limit
Screen time. So either way you look at it might be a good thing, might not be so favorable, but I know as a mom, that's okay with me for a little less screen time. But so let's talk about this one. This one is one of my favorites. More boys get concussions than girls.
Based on the information we have, that's not true.
He tiptoed on that one. You noticed that.
Well,
Tiptoed lightly.
But let's talk about the reality. Is it a physiologic reason why girls or women would have concussions more than men, neck muscles, just genetically? Or is it that women tend to be a little more honest about their situation? That is, a man and the ego maybe, I'm tough, I'm not gonna tell anybody, I'm feeling a little awkward, right? But women tend to be out there to, hey, I'm feeling a little off balance, or I'm seeing something that's not right, or hearing something that's a little different. So I don't know, but that's an interesting piece of information.
I find that very interesting. And so I did some research. I love
What did you
to
find?
do research. I found out of the top sports played in a game, they divided into games or practices, because you can get concussions when you're practicing sports too.
Yeah.
So, you may not know that. So out of games played, number one concussed sport is rugby,
Makes sense. That's why we wear football helmets, in the NFL.
Rugby doesn't
right?
have helmets. I'm not into
Yeah,
rugby.
no.
Okay, no.
No helmets. Makes sense.
Football,
They
men's
wear rugby
football.
shirts too. That's where that word came from, rugby shirts. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
There you go.
Next.
Okay, men's football is number 2 most concussed in a game,
Okay.
right?
That seems logical to me.
The third one is my favorite. It's not favorite because that's kind of
Yes,
sad. We're talking concussions.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I know what it must be now. It's got to be hockey.
Women's ice hockey. Out of gender, because we did that myth about boys or girls, right? Out of gender, women's ice hockey during a game is the third most concussed sport. We got to get our women some better helmets.
Get those
That
neck
was a myth,
muscles.
too. It's not- they don't prevent. But helmets have got to have a function, right?
They do help. I think they do. But they're not going to 100% prevent it.
Prevent it. Okay. So fourth most concussed in a game setting, men's ice hockey. 5th most women's soccer, and 6th most men's soccer.
Wow.
That out of all sports,
Right.
those are the most concussed players on a team sport. Or just
Think about it. Well, but only of this group, only hockey players wear helmets. No
no,
one
men's
does that.
football.
Oh, and football.
Yeah.
Men's
So
football, right.
rugby, men's football, women's ice hockey, women's soccer, and then men's soccer.
Soccer. Yeah, all that headbutting.
Headbutting. So that, I just got to talk about this because one of your big claim to fames is what is the most concussed position or person on a baseball field?
Oh, yeah, I love that. That's one of my favorites, right?
It is.
Who is that, right?
a good
What would it
fact.
be? Okay. Can you guess who it would be? Well, I would guess initially it might be the catcher, right? But the catcher has one advantage. They're the ones trying to catch the ball, okay? They have at least to determine their own fate. But the guy behind them does not. And so it's the umpire who's the most concussed participant in baseball. Isn't that crazy? Not the only one, but the most, because the ball is ricocheting off them often.
But now catchers, they wear helmets, right?
What they do, they wear a mask and a helmet, but so does the umpire.
But
Right.
does the catcher or the umpire, do they wear like latest, greatest technology helmets? Because they look pretty old and
They do,
simple to
actually.
me.
They took the technology that they've been using in ice hockey
Oh.
and now have converted that to baseball. It's not
Very cool.
traditional,
Okay.
right? It's not old school, it's new school.
Cool. So let's see. So bottom line is, am I going to die from a concussion?
Well, you could if it's more than a concussion, but in and of itself, a single time, the chances are very, very small. It would be something in addition to a concussion that you would be the reason why you would die. Like you have a concussion, but you also have an aneurysm in the head and it starts bleeding. So a concussion by itself is not going to kill you.
There's your fact for the day.
There you go.
So as always, we ask you for feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Are you enjoying our weekly show? And then what questions can we answer for you? Because we've got a doctor, a physician, Dr. Gallups, and we've got myself, the marketing person, but I can ask him your questions. So please let us know. What'd you like to hear from us? What can we dive deeper into?
Yeah, I'd like to have something a little more more fun. And when we get our studio complete, it's going to be really killer too. And we're going to be able to.
It
it'll be
can't
more-
happen fast enough.
Well, and no, you can't die by watching this either. So, are you going to die by watching this? It's not killer like that. Okay, that's it.
So
All right.
thank you for being here and joining us today. Get your kids protected from concussions as best you can. And one thing we didn't touch on, but we do offer as the ENT Institute, we offer physical therapy and we offer baseline concussion screenings.
Oh, that's very important. Yeah.
Before your athlete gets a concussion or is subject to a concussion, have them come in for a baseline concussion screening. Look at what's on our screen is we've got a female ice hockey player who actually did come in for her baseline concussion screening with our facility and with our physical therapists. And it's painless. It's 15 to 20 minutes. You get the printout reading. You can take it to your pediatrician and keep it on file. And then in the event that your child is exposed to a concussion, we have a baseline to go off
And that's
of.
really important, and that is cutting edge, and that's what we do at the ENT Institute. We're leaders in healthcare and healthcare delivery and innovators in that delivery. So do something that's been around but no one's taking advantage of now. Get a baseline concussion screening so that you know where you started, so you would know how to better treat somebody later. Okay? Anyway, thanks for tuning in. All right?
See you next
week.